What's going on, young people? Thanks for joining me for another day of Unit 9 on social psychology. Today's going to be a fun one. We're talking about things like bias, and prejudice, and discrimination. So we do have 6 Roman numerals that we're going to work through today. Let's start off with some definitions here. The word prejudice and discrimination. I want to make a little note about this word here, prejudice. This is the noun, prejudice. If you were describing somebody as having prejudice, that's when you would add in that D to say, oh, this idea, this organization is prejudiced. They have prejudice. So just make sure that you're spelling that correctly. When we talk about the word prejudice, prejudge. That's what this word means. It's a preconceived attitude or opinion. It's not based on actual interactions with a person or a group. It's more of an emotional attitude or idea. So prejudice is in your mind. Discrimination, when we use that word, we are referring to actions or behavior that come from this prejudgment, when you favor one group over another. Typically, discrimination is based on some sort of a stereotype. Okay, you may interact with one person or have one experience with a person, and then you take a belief about them and you overgeneralize it. You apply it to a large group of people, and sometimes this justifies in that person's mind the behavior or the actions that are favoring one group over another. Unfortunately, usually stereotypes and the resulting discrimination and these ideas that people have is often based on illusory correlations, meaning false correlations, right? Illusions, things that are not true. We may assume things because of media portrayals or culture or what we heard growing up about a certain person or group of people. We may assume things about them, but as we learn about in Unit 1, just because things are correlated does not mean that one thing is causing the other, okay? We cannot make assumptions about whole groups of people based on very small interactions from one individual, okay? Unfortunately, the brain, we are cognitive misers. We don't think very hard. Our brain takes all sorts of shortcuts, which often ends up in us making false assumptions about people, okay? A woman named Jane Elliott demonstrated this. She was an elementary school teacher in the 60s, and after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, she wanted to teach her class, an elementary school group of all white students, about discrimination and prejudice. And she did a really interesting study that demonstrated the difference between what we call in-groups and out-groups. An in-group is the people that you feel like you are in with. Your people, right? It might be your group of 3 or 4 friends. It might be the sports team that you are on. In-groups can also be large, right? If you are traveling through East Asia and you're in Thailand and you meet somebody and they're from Gwinnett County or they're from Georgia, or if you're in an isolated area and you just like meet another American, you might think to yourself, oh my gosh, I have such a connection with this person. You feel loyal to them, you respect them, you appreciate them, you feel connected. They're part of your in-group, all right? You're part of many in-groups, and oftentimes your brain prefers the people that you know, the people that you associate with yourself. This is called in-group bias. We all have this. It becomes problematic when we don't just like our people, our group, but when we think that they are better than other people. That is called ethnocentrism. When you think that your specific group is better, superior to another group, that's ethnocentrism. And that becomes a problem because the way you treat your out groups, the people who are not like you, right? Oftentimes, when we have an in-group, we assume that everyone else, the other, that they're all kind of the same and they're not like us. They're not as good as us. They're not as funny as us. They don't understand us. We're better than them, okay? This leads to conflict between groups, in-groups and out-groups. Now, sometimes you might meet someone new from an out-group, and if you like them, it does not change your whole opinion of the out-group. Instead, you just consider them an exception, right? Oh, they're just the one person from this group. They're the one kid from Beaufort or North Gwinnett or whatever school or community that you just like that one person, but you still don't like the group, right? This can sometimes be associated with what we call a token group member, okay? Someone who, Shelley Taylor did the research, who is perceived as a stereotype of a particular group, right? So in your group of friends, you might have a token group member, the one CDAT friend, the one football player, right? Or token group is sometimes referred to the one gay guy or the one black girl in a friend group. Unfortunately for these token group members, they are more likely to be stereotyped, and people often don't remember a lot about their personality and their characteristics because they only focus on the one thing that makes them different, unique, or stand out, okay? And typically when people get mixed up with other folks, typically it's like women getting mixed up with women, men getting mixed up with men, that tall guy getting mixed up with that other tall guy, right? It's like, if there's something unique about them, we don't have to pay attention to anything else about their personality because they have that one thing that stands out. They're the one person who has this attribute. That's a token group member, and we need to try and avoid treating these people a certain way, okay? It's tough for our brains though, because our brains, again, take shortcuts, these mental cognitive biases, right? So like some things about this that result is like, we sometimes have trouble telling apart people of other races, right? If I show you this image, it's actually 18 different girls. But for folks who maybe didn't grow up around Asian culture, around Asian folks, they might not be able to tell the difference between people. There was a meme going around that said, white people, they all look the same, okay? The reason why our brain has trouble, two reasons. First, typically you spend the most time with people who look like you, and therefore your brain has just had more practice distinguishing between people of a similar race or background from you. Additionally, this associates with the token group member stuff. When someone is different from us, we mainly just notice the fact that they're different from us, and we don't pay attention to those less noticeable characteristics, the more specific details of like their appearance, for example. So we need to be aware of this so that we can help our brain practice and avoid these situations that can be problematic because of the fact that your brain tries to take shortcuts, right? Our brains are lazy. Quick check for understanding for you. These first three scenarios relate to prejudice, discrimination, and stereotypes. See if you can match them up. Number 4 kind of has your opinion. And then number 5, make sure you understand how our brain views token group members. If you need to pause it to kind of go through these, feel free. We'll go over them in class together. We're on to our last 2 bullet points. Roman numeral 5 here about implicit bias. Implicit means inner, okay? Implicit bias, it's unconscious. It's an automatic bias or associations that our brain makes. We don't mean to be biased. It just kind of happens because of the people we surround ourselves with, the conversations we've had, the experiences that we've had, the media we view. It could be that our brain makes associations between people of a certain age, gender, sexuality, race. It could be about like where people are from. We make assumptions about them. The way they look, we make assumptions about them. We don't mean to. This does not necessarily make us bad people. It's kind of an automatic thing. It's just how our brains work. We need to be aware of the fact that our brains do this, okay? And there's a way to measure just how much bias you have. It's called the implicit association test, or you can abbreviate it to the IAT if you want to put a star by that point. It measures your automatic associations, all right? It's really interesting. Here's how this test works. I'm going to kind of walk you through what a test might look like in terms of age, determining if you have an age bias, okay? So the first thing they do, if you do this on a phone or computer, is it asks you to sort pictures and words into categories, all right? So like this picture here, you have to sort it into either the category young person or old person. And then for this picture, sort it into young person or old person. Then they show you some words. Is this a bad word or a good word? A bad word or a good word? So it times you on how quickly you can associate and you can sort words into the right category. Then they make things a little bit tougher. They combine categories. So now they'll show a combination of words and faces, and you have to, as quickly as you can, determine and sort whether this goes into category bad words or young people, or good words and old people. So like for this word, cheerful, I would want to put it into this category on the right, good and old people. Same thing for this picture of an elderly person. I would want to put it in this category here as fast as I can. Then it gets tough. They swap the categories. Now, old people are associated with bad, negative words in this category, and young people are associated with good words in this category. And they have you go through 7 iterations of this test. They're timing you the entire time. And what it's looking at is how quickly can your brain make the new associations. And then it tells you how you did. It's like I took this test this morning, and it said that I have a slight preference for young people. I am biased. I apparently like young people more than old people. And most folks who take this particular test, they do have a bias. 30% have a strong preference for young people, 30% have a moderate preference for young people, and 17% of people have a slight preference. That's the category I fell in. I was slightly biased towards young people, meaning over 3/4 of people who took this test show that they preferred young people. Only 7% of people preferred old people. Those might have been folks who spent a lot of time with elderly individuals, live with them, or maybe are older themselves. We all have bias, and you can take different types of tests. You can take one about body type and the bias you might have towards different types of people. You might have some bias about gender and jobs. So who you expect to have a career, who you expect to be staying at home with kids, and how much money you might expect them to make. You might have bias about race, right? Some of those famous implicit association tests are about looking at how quickly people can associate white and black with good and bad and good. And just like how your brain does trying to put people and words into specific categories. The quicker your brain can make these associations, it lets you know that you have a slight preference in the way you associate certain concepts, okay? Most people do have some sort of a preference, and you can read more about this and look this up as well. So I'm going to put the link in a couple places for you in case you want to go take some of these tests. tinyurl.com/Jones20, it's an old link, IAT, implicit association test, in case you want to try and figure out what your automatic associations are so that you can be aware of them, all right? Now, what do we do, Mr. Jones, when we're aware of our biases? How do we resolve these issues? How do we minimize conflict between groups? There are two theories. The first idea is that we can become less prejudiced, less biased, simply by interacting with people who are different from us, right? In the appropriate conditions, interpersonal conflict, meaning, contact, interpersonal between people is a really effective way to reduce prejudice. That's cool. Just interacting with folks who are not like you, it helps you understand and have empathy and be more comfortable and familiar with people from different backgrounds as you. The second theory as to how we can resolve conflicts and minimize prejudice comes from a guy named Muzaffar Sharif. What a fun name. Put a star by his name. He did this famous experiment at a camp for kids. It was called the Robbers Cave experiment, where he put these kids into groups and he had them hate each other. He had them develop prejudice, and then he and his team tried to figure out how to bring them back together. And what they found was that the way to resolve conflicts and reduce prejudice, it's not just about interacting with people who are different from you, but it's about working together, interdependence, not independence, being on your own, but interdependence, working with others towards what he called, put a star by this word, superordinate goals, super goals, these big, complicated projects that were going to benefit lots of different types of people. He said, that's how we reduce our prejudice. It's by working on projects together that are going to have a common good for all sorts of different folks. Questions for you. So first off, which of these IATs would you want to take? You can go look at them again. tinyurl.com/Jones20IAT. I encourage you to get on your phone or open a new tab and pull up that site and click through. Are there any tests that you might be hesitant to take? Why might you be a little nervous about taking some of these tests? Why might you be nervous about learning your biases? It's kind of a personal question for you to think about. Number two, similar, how do you feel about this idea of unconscious associations? And then question number three, if we're trying to build bonds between groups, do you prefer this first idea that just like interacting with folks helps us reduce conflicts and reduce prejudice? Or do you prefer the second theory from Muzaffar Sharif that really we need to be working together on these superordinate, super important projects, things like clean water, clean air, solving projects and issues that will help the entire school, the entire student body, our entire community, these big projects, these super projects. Which approach do you think is a better way to reduce prejudice? Think about these things. Appreciate y'all. Peace out.